All the action packed in 180 minutes. Power Breakfast with Tessa Dooms. Weekdays 6 to 9 a.m.
The time is 8:13. Talking about young people, it is G20 time in South Africa. We are the president of the G20 as a nation. And so the young people have stepped into the room. They've joined the WhatsApp chat, the G20 WhatsApp chat with the Y20. And so one of the co-chairs of the Y20 joins us this morning, Raymond Matlala, and he is going to give us a sense of what the Y20 is about. Next week, on the 18th and 19th of June, the Y20 has one of its first summit meetings and gatherings around the G20. And so we want to understand not only what young people will be doing in the Y20 process, what the issues are that they will be championing, but also how they intend to make this an opportunity for young people to excel in the political space, in the governance space, and on the global stage. Raymond, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Tell us a little bit more about the Y20.
Thank you so much for having me, and good morning to the listeners. Yeah, look, Y20 is an official youth engagement group of the G20. It's one of the oldest engagement group. This year celebrating 15 years of existence since 2010. And its role really is to ensure that the voices of youth find expression in the leaders' discussions and ultimately the leaders' declaration. In our case, that will be processed in November during the Heads of State Summit.
And so what kind of space does this give young people to participate in the G20? A lot of people, when the G20 started, asked how do, regular South Africans in our various communities benefit from the G20 or even participate. How are you creating space for young people to participate and to benefit from our hosting of the G20?
Yeah, look, our Y20 is the most inclusive Y20 in the last 15 years thus far. So what we've done is we've opened up expression of interest for young people, young organizations, not only in South Africa, but in the continent and also in the global south. The first of its nature that is done like that. To allow young people to participate and influence the policies that would be discussed by the official delegations. We've received over 2,000 applications. That is youth-led organizations,
Sure.
and individuals. And all of them have been put into what we call working groups.
And so these are 2,000 applications from South African youth or youth from the global south? I'm just trying to...
So obviously the majority is from South Africa, with about 200-300 from the continent and the global south. And those working groups are co-chaired, right, by South African, and we find someone from the continent and one at least from the global south if we have the best applicants from there.
Okay.
And as I speak to you, they've started now drafting the policy position of South Africa, but more largely of the G20 youth component.
So the theme of the G20 this year is around equality, solidarity, and sustainability. What are some of the key policy issues that you as the young people are going to bring to the table, especially from a Global South perspective?
No, absolutely. Look, we're looking at the climate change and environmental sustainability. And there we don't just look at just transition, but we look at equitable just transition. And leading the energy transition, of course, is one of those key fundamental issues in that theme, followed by inclusive economic growth and employment. A topical topic now in South Africa is the issue of youth unemployment. There was a discussion in one of the portfolio committees about the expanded definition and so forth. The fact of the matter is there's over 40% of young people that are unemployed.
Yeah. And so the unemployment question is a big one. But I want to say, Raymond, that it's important for youth issues to not only be narrowly about things that affect youth acutely, right? Because young people are more than just possible employers or employees. There's also so many different aspects of young people's lives that go unnoticed. Young people are parents, for example. Young people are parts of communities. They're community leaders. They're activists. Are there ways for us to start to broaden what the youth agenda looks like, especially in a context that I painted a bit just before you started our conversation, where young people are not seen as potential leaders of society? There's always this idea of young people as beneficiaries. But how do we start to drive the idea that young people need to start leading, especially in the continent of Africa and the global south, where young people are the majority of the population? Surely all issues are youth issues when the young people are the majority, and therefore the leadership of young people should be something we're championing.
Absolutely. In fact, the fourth thematic area is meaningful youth engagement and reform of multilateralism for just future.
Sure.
And part of those objectives is how do we mobilize youth to meaningfully engage in foreign and financial policy dialogues, focusing on transparency, inclusion, and equitable allocation of resources. A lot of this, even in the G20, right, the BRICS Youth Summit, G20 Youth Summit, even in the UN, in the AU, young people has always been taken as by the way.
And they get their own desk, their own table. I call it the kids' table of politics is for young people, but it's separate from the mainstay and the main table.
So we definitely, I call it the talk show because we're talking to ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't talk directly in those boardrooms, in those seats. So what we are going to be very strongly focusing on in this thematic area is how do we put together a framework that can then guide governments, particularly the G20 government, to start implementing some of these things. And of course, we have an advocacy process after the G20 Youth Summit, which is taking place in August. So that is one of the thematic areas that are very strongly and close to our heart in terms of our objectives for this year.
Absolutely.
And I say this because we have introduced what we call the G20 Youth Council.
Yeah.
That will then start looking at the policy recommendation, because for the last 14 years, we've never seen any of the policy recommendations by youth being implemented by any of the member states. So during our presidency as Y20, we want to put a structure, a mechanism that will ensure that there is some of those through advocacy and other things that are implemented by G20 member states.
So a legacy project from South Africa's side. If young people want to get involved in the Y20, next week you are having an engagement on the 18th and the 19th as well. But even as the year unfolds, how do they get involved in the Y20?
So for next week, because of is a pre-summit and we're looking at draft 0 negotiations with member states, it's a bit of a closed session. But what we've done is to allow a broader participation through a hybrid platform.
Cool.
So we those that have seen our social medias, we've put in the links for to join online. Again, based on resources, we could only accommodate 120 people for this pre-summit, and then we allow a limited number online to get engaged.
Sure. I hope that we'll be able to engage with you next week on the 18th and the 19th on the outcomes of the pre-summit, but really looking forward to seeing what comes out of the Y20 this year. Young people to the front, as they say, but I also say let youth lead. So thank you so much, Raymond Matlala, the co-chair of the Y20 SA, for giving us a perspective on young people's leadership and participation in the G20.